All right, so welcome to our third Thursday training, and tonight we are looking at the proposed amendments to the Constitution for the form of government section. And before we jump into that, we're going to ask God for some help. So let's pray. Holy and loving God, thank you for these amazing minds you have given us, minds that are curious and thoughtful, minds that play with language and look for ways that we can describe our work and your work and our place in this world with better clarity. Thank you for the ability to put our minds to work, to be curious, to ask questions, to wonder about what is and what could be. Be with us as we explore the work of the church, the work of people who came together with their minds, hearts, and spirits and wrestled with who we want to be as the Presbyterian Church in the coming years. Open our minds for understanding and curiosity as we explore these proposed amendments tonight. We ask this in Jesus' name. Amen.
Amen.
So I will share my screen for tonight. There are 17 proposed amendments to just the form of government section. So if you were with us last month in November, we looked specifically at the proposed amendments for the foundations section and the worship section. Tonight, we're looking at the proposed amendments to the form of government section, the G section. And then in January, so it's fresh in our heads ahead of our February 7th special presbytery meeting, in January on the third Thursday, we're going to look at the proposed amendments to the discipline section, which includes an entire rewriting, reorganization of that section. And so that our January third Thursday will include a PowerPoint looking at the differences between the current rules of discipline and what's being proposed to replace it as a church discipline section. So highlight coming features. G-rated for all audiences. Okay, so for tonight's purposes, I am just going to share the pamphlet, the booklet of proposed amendments. That this is available to free download. I'm pretty sure it's on our website with our Presbytery meeting page. And if you just Google PCUSA GA amendments, it popped up for me that way. And so you can see these are the list of all those proposed amendments all the way up to GG. And the way the proposed amendments always work is it's the year of the General Assembly. In this case, it was 2022. And then they are listed in an ABCD order based on their order in the Book of Order. So today we're starting with 22C, which takes us to G 1.0501. Again, with all of the proposed amendments, they all follow this format. They start with shall this be changed? In this case, shall a new G 10501 be inserted? So this is a new section into the form of government. And the current G 10501 and subsequent sections be renumbered accordingly as follows. So the text to be added, the proposed new text, is in italics. And that, as you can see, is about meetings. Here's the text. Meetings shall be opened and closed with prayer. Unless the congregation shall designate another parliamentary authority in its bylaws, meetings shall be conducted in accordance with the most recent edition of Robert's Rules of Order, newly revised, except when it is in contradiction to this Constitution. In accordance with the requirement of Robert's Rules of Order, newly revised, congregations and their committees may meet electronically at the discretion of their sessions, provided that the technology employed allows for all members present to hear and be heard simultaneously. This includes joining one or more persons electronically to an otherwise in-person meeting. Congregations should adopt special rules of order and standing rules to govern such meetings. So that's the proposed additional language to be added to this section. As you can see, it is our nod to the reality that we're living in, right? It allows for both electronic meetings and hybrid meetings, the in-person as well as electronic attendance. And it seeks to codify what has become our practice since right around March of 2020. So, any questions on that?
I think it's good.
Yeah, it would certainly maybe clear some things up for some of our churches, and then it puts in our Constitution what we're already doing, how we are already practicing. All right.
Cindy, is there new or existing language that can be used as a boilerplate to be adopted at the congregational level so that folks don't have to reinvent that wheel?
Yeah, for the special rules of order and standing rules.
Yeah, as it relates to being able to use electronic format and all that.
Yeah, so if this passes by a majority of the presbytery, this would give that permission first and foremost. So a congregation wouldn't have to vote to have a meeting electronically, because it would be in our Constitution. That permission would be set. The special rules would be for how that would happen. And as always, I recommend that being as simple as possible, because the more complex we make it, the harder it is to abide by it. So the language we have in the Presbytery manual about our hybrid meetings and electronic meetings would be an example, and that's something we could point to.
Thank you.
Yeah, definitely. All right. Number 2, or D in this case, meetings of the congregation. This is related to the business proper to congregational meetings. Shall it be amended as follows? G10503. Again, it's added text in italics. And so that proposed added text is adding a G, receiving a disciplinary decision against a member of the congregation as required in D, the Rules of Discipline 90102. So currently, under the business proper to congregational meetings, there isn't a provision for receiving a disciplinary decision, which doesn't happen often, but sometimes a session does act as a permanent judicial commission for a congregation and render a decision of discipline against a member. I've seen it once that I'm aware of. And it's required that that decision be shared with the congregation. And so this would kind of close a hole in our polity, make allowance for something that's required that we don't specifically make allowance for. Does that make sense?
Mhm.
If the proposed rewrite of the Rules of Discipline passes, this would then, that citation D90102 would be changed to correspond to the new numbering. That's automatic. All right. Amendment E, relating to ministers of word and sacrament and the categories of membership. All right. Brace yourselves. Again, deleted text has a strike through, additional text is in italics. In this particular case, the proposed amendment is to change the categories of membership for ministers of word and sacrament. And as you see, it is to remove the language of honorably. In the first paragraph, the categories of membership, the proposed language would be engaged in ministry validated by the presbytery, a member at large is determined by the presbytery, or retired. And then under defining the category, it would read simply retired. And then upon request of a member of presbytery, the presbytery may designate the member retired, period. So the proposed amendment is removing the language of honorably, and then because of age or physical or mental disability, that you can just ask to be retired. Questions? I will say that this particular overture received some fairly energetic debate, especially from our minister members. So during General Assembly, a lot of the debate by minister members was against removing the language of honorably. The assembly decided to move forward, and in part, and you see the background and rationale in the booklet, but in part, it only having the category of honorably retired means that that is the only way we can recognize somebody who retires. And frankly, not everyone retires honorably. And it bestows an honorific without consideration. And so part of the concern is for those who have not served honorably, or whose service has been marked with difficulty. The only option has been honorably retired. One of the questions asked during the assembly was, why don't we just leave it up to presbyteries, since it is the presbytery that establishes membership? And as a presbytery leader, I am glad that the assembly did not go that route, because can you imagine how terrible it would be to receive a request and then have to debate whether that person would be honorably retired or simply retired, or even dishonorably retired if it was up to the presbytery. No, we don't want to open that can of worms. And so what came from the assembly is this proposed amendment. Any questions? All right. And of course, we will have an opportunity during our February presbytery meeting to do our own debate on all of these things. Matt, our moderator, and I will work together on the format of that meeting. But if any of these are amendments you want to say a word about, you will have that opportunity on February 7th. Okay, Amendment F, still related to ministers of word and sacrament. And this is related to the transfer of ministers from other denominations. And so in this case, it's both adding and striking out languages. So it would read, in the case of ministers for immigrant fellowships and congregations, a presbytery may, if it determines that its strategy for mission with that group requires it, this is the language to be added, and in consultation and partnership with that community, And then it continues, recognize the ordination and receive as a member of Presbytery a new immigrant minister who furnishes evidence of good standing in a denomination, striking out even though and adding if at the time of enrollment that minister lacks the educational history required of candidates, proposing to add the presbytery should provide such educational opportunities as seem necessary and prudent for that minister's successful ministry in the presbytery. So this is recognizing that especially because of the work of Presbyterian missionaries around the world, there are waves of immigrants coming to the United States who were raised Presbyterian and want to be Presbyterian and either join an existing Presbyterian church or for reasons of language or worship style or other traditions seek to create a new church. And so this language is meant to both require the presbytery to make any of these decisions about ministers for immigrant fellowships in consultation and partnership with that community. You would hope we wouldn't have to put that language in the Book of Order, but it's good to have there to be reminded. And then some of the language around the educational piece that we hold as really necessary. So tightening up some of that language. Any questions on that one? All right. Amendment G, under preparation for ministry and the purpose of inquiry. And I'm happy to share with you today that the Presbytery's Commission on Preparation for Missional Ministry received a new inquirer into the ordination process today. It was a wonderful, joyful meeting. So, purpose of inquiry, the amendment proposes to add this language about what the inquirer is doing. They shall provide a certificate of completion of boundary training, which includes the topic of sexual misconduct and child sexual abuse prevention training with recertification at least every 36 months. The presbytery shall determine which trainings are approved to meet the criteria of these two requirements. So in Newcastle Presbytery, we already do that. We require anyone entering the ordination process or the process to be commissioned as a ruling elder to take healthy boundary training within the first year of their process or to ask for an extension. And then we require that to be renewed every 3 years. Yeah, so this is something that is already part of our practice. And Eddie, I just saw your chat. Is that, he's asking about the language of shall, and shall is you have to language, where should is, it would be a good idea, but you don't have to. Was that about the previous amendment?
Yes, it was. Yeah.
Okay. And so the question was in the proposed amendment about transfer of ministers, this piece, the presbytery should provide such educational opportunities. Yeah, I'm not sure why it should instead of shall. My guess, and it may be clearer in the background and rationale, my guess is to provide some additional flexibility. It may be decided that if a minister has been ordained for 10 years and serving in another denomination that didn't require Greek and Hebrew, that requiring Greek and Hebrew at that point in order to serve as a minister in a new immigrant congregation might not be necessary. So that should language gives that breathing room as opposed to the shall, which becomes binding. It's my best guess. So, any questions on the preparation for ministry requirement around boundary training in the addition of that language? And I will say it is something as a church, there was a task force called the Survivors of Sexual Misconduct Task Force that really did some deep looking at our policies and procedures and came back and said, here are some places where the church could do a little bit more to work towards safety of people who are vulnerable. All right. Amendment H, also in preparation for ministry, about oversight. And again, this comes from the same task force of survivors of sexual misconduct. The proposal is to add language. So under oversight, it currently reads, during the phases of inquiry and candidacy, the individual continues to be an active member of his or her congregation and subject to the concern and discipline of the session. The proposed language to add reads, however, during the time the individual is enrolled as an inquirer or candidate, the session shall report to the presbytery any matters of sexual misconduct. And then the paragraph would continue as it does in matters relating to preparation for ministry. The individual is subject to the oversight of the presbytery within the context of their covenant relationship. So again, seeking to close a loop, just making clear a session responsibility. Any questions on that one?
Cindy, are you aware of matters other than sexual misconduct that do not need to be reported? That sounds very specific to me.
It is very specific, and because this came out of that particular task force, I understand why it's specific. I would say, though, that if there were any matters of concern, that it would be important for the session to communicate that with the preparation for ministry people, and in our case, CPMM. So if the session sees concerning behavior or somebody preaches a sermon where the theology is really outside of the Reformed tradition, which is a pretty wide tradition, I would say all of those kinds of things that you would be concerned about should be shared, but they're being very specific here. Yeah. Which I imagine comes out of a specific example, a specific situation. Yeah. Proposed amendment I, around call and installation. This is something that comes out of the Family Leave Policy Task Force and is proposing to add language about the terms of call, and that language would read, the call shall include provision for a minimum of 12 weeks paid family leave and participation in the benefits plan of the Presbyterian Church USA. And so this is specifically for terms of call for those who are in installed positions, because this particular paragraph is about installed positions. So it would be adding to terms of call for an installed positions, a minimum of 12 weeks paid family leave. Yeah. Any questions about that one? Amendment J, having to do with commissioning ruling elders to particular pastoral service. Oh, and this one is a mix of adding and striking out. And this is something that this is how this presbytery functions. We commission ruling elders to serve at the presbytery level with the authority to moderate more than one particular session and the authority to celebrate sacraments in more than one particular church. So this language is seeking to make it clear that that is a possibility. So G21001, when the presbytery in consultation with proposed language, one or more sessions, or other responsible committees, determines that a strategy for mission requires it, the presbytery may authorize a ruling elder to be commissioned to limited pastoral service, proposed additional language, as a commissioned pastor, also known as a commissioned ruling elder, as assigned by the presbytery. And so it's also giving the nod to the fact that in the general world, like if I walk around and say, I'm a teaching elder, people outside of Presbyterian circles don't understand what that means. So I say I'm a pastor or I'm a minister. I don't usually say I'm a minister of word and sacrament because that's a really particular Presbyterian language. Same thing with commissioned ruling elder. You know, our CREs, we know what that means, but for the church, for the community, they're commissioned pastors, and most use that kind of language. So this gives a nod to that reality. Continuing, a ruling elder so designated may be commissioned to serve, and this is proposed language, one or more validated ministries of the presbytery. So it's that expansiveness. Presbytery in its commission may authorize the ruling elder to moderate the session of the congregation, proposed to add, or congregations to which he or she is commissioned. And then the paragraph goes on. So it's a little more permissive and expansive language here. Any questions about that one? Look at us, we're on the cutting edge. We're doing all this stuff. They're like, we should be like Newcastle. Let's put it in the Book of Order. That's exactly how that all worked. Okay, Amendment K. Also commission ruling elders. And again, this is something we are already doing. And it adds the similar language that was added to the inquiry process. So the proposal is to add, such preparation shall include a certificate of completion of boundary training, which includes the topic of sexual misconduct and child sexual abuse prevention training with recertification at least every 36 months. The presbytery shall determine which trainings are approved to meet the criteria of these two requirements. So exact same language as what we saw earlier for inquirers, and something that we already require. So, any questions about that one? All right, L, certified church service. We're still in chapter 2 of the form of government. All right, this one has to do with Christian educators. There we go. And so it's a little longer. And it is all language to be added. So for Christian educators under skills and training, it's the same thing. Certified Christian educators shall provide a certificate of completion of boundary training, which includes the topic of sexual misconduct and child sexual abuse prevention training with recertification at least every 36 months. The presbytery shall determine which trainings are approved to meet these two requirements. So again, the same requirement as in other positions of leadership within the church. And then under presbytery responsibility, where the presbytery shall establish minimum requirements, adding the language there as well. Certified Christian educators and certified associate Christian educators shall provide to the presbytery in which they serve a certificate of completion of boundary training. Now, one of the things that's different with our certified Christian educators is that there's a national certifying body within the Presbyterian Church. And so the difference here is this last sentence: presbytery shall report a certificate of completion to the national certifying body for these two trainings. So it's that additional piece, but closes the loop back to the national body, which will track those certificates of completion if they move between presbyteries. So any questions on that one in line with the others?
Cindy,
Yes.
later on, I believe there's going to be an amendment that talks about adding training and education on racial.
Yes.
So curiosity is, why wouldn't this request for racial training would not be included in these two previous amendments?
Yeah, and the simple reason is these came from that task force of survivors of sexual abuse. And so they were very, very clearly focused on the work they were doing. The other one around anti-racism training came from a different place. And that one is attached to each council. And we'll see that in a few minutes, but we'll see that it's attached to each council of the church as opposed to roles within the church. So a little different with that one. Yeah. So, all right, general principles of councils. Now we're in chapter 3. Woohoo! Amendment M. And this is around the officers in councils. And just as a reminder, the language of council applies to the session. It applies to the presbytery. In this case, our presbytery doesn't have a governing council. We have the trustees who have commission authority. We have the round table that has authority around organizing presbytery gatherings, but the presbytery itself is the council. And then the synod, council, general assembly. So each of those are council levels. So officers, and this is the permissive language to be added to the end of this paragraph. It is appropriate for councils to adopt procedures that may allow for electronic session meetings. So again, that language mirrors the earlier language about Robert's Rules of Order newly revised and the ability to use electronic meetings. But also the reminder that it's up to a council to adopt its own procedures to determine how that is used. So that's a pretty simple addition there. General principles of councils under meetings. And again, this echoes what we saw back in G1. The proposal is to add the language: in accordance with the requirement of Robert's Rules of Order newly revised, councils and their commissions and committees may meet electronically, provided that the technology employed allows for all members present to hear and be heard simultaneously. This includes joining one or more persons electronically to an otherwise in-person meeting. Council should adopt special rules of order and standing rules to govern such meetings. And so I remember very, very, very clearly, because I was in the middle of it, how in the spring of 2020, the General Assembly, the Committee on the Office of the General Assembly, was trying to figure out, how does the assembly meet? We had no provisions for electronic meetings of the General Assembly, none. And the committee of Robert's Rules of Order, newly revised, declined to issue an emergency ruling that allowed bodies to have electronic meetings if they didn't already state in their bylaws or constitution that they were allowed. So that General Assembly in 2020 was out of order because we didn't have the language permitting us to meet electronically, and we couldn't meet in person because of the pandemic. So you can see that we will never again be out of order by meeting electronically, given if all of these amendments pass, which so far they're getting affirmative votes. So these feel a little personal to me. It's probably just me. All right, moving on to Amendment O under Administration of Mission. And this still is in Chapter 3. And this is, okay. So in the Administration of Mission, this particular amendment is asking to add language around misconduct prevention. Each council's policy shall include requirements for boundary training, which includes the topic of sexual misconduct and child sexual abuse prevention training for its members at least every 36 months. And so if this amendment passes, this means that sessions, as well as presbyteries, synods, and the General Assembly, would be required to provide for some boundary trainings. And so that's something that the presbytery would look to help with, just like we tried to provide templates for the policies of abuse prevention. And so we would try to come alongside. So every church would not be required to come up with their own training. But if this is approved, if a majority of presbyteries vote yes on this amendment, then this would go into effect next June with that requirement. Any questions on that one?
Good idea.
So, Cindy, would that mean that the presbytery or the session can decide what they're going to use for the child abuse, sexual?
Yeah, so in this case, it would be the session who would make a decision about what would be considered acceptable. And a session could say, we find what the presbytery offers acceptable. Or, I mean, some of our sessions have people with deeper training in this, who work in childcare or in education, and so receive regular training around abuse prevention. And so a session may have somebody, or a church may have a member who says, I've got a great training. It really is helpful. Let's use this one. And so a session could have the right to say, yeah, we want to use this particular training that's been recommended to us.
Because I do the Boy Scouts.
Yep.
Which, okay, their sexual awareness and abuse training right now is excellent, and it's required every 2 years.
Okay.
And you could get other people to do it because there's a test that goes along with that.
Okay. Yeah, so that's a resource that you have access to. So that's something you could definitely bring to the Easton session.
Yeah.
And depending on what's possible, something you could offer to other churches as well, if that's a possibility. Yeah.
Okay,
cool.
I just was wondering, because they do have because of all their lawsuits, they have come up with a very extensive,
Yeah.
training that everybody has to take, and it is it is very good.
Good, good. Well, there are things I could say, but I won't. Lyle, I
know.
see your hand raised. And Lyle, if you're speaking, there you go.
Yes, I do. I do have my hand raised, and that's because I wondered, I understand the session's accountability and responsibility, but is this for leadership in the church, or is it for every member? My assumption is it's for the leaders of the church, for the session, the Board of Deacons, and whatever the session says, whomever they choose to include, I guess. I guess that would be in the decision of each session as to who should, youth workers could be included. So that, am I reading that correctly, that it will be up to the session?
Yes, yes. And it does not specify, it doesn't say only for leaders or for everybody. It is open.
That's good, I think. I like that.
Yeah.
Okay. So I'm understanding it correctly, which is one of the reasons I'm attending these meetings.
Yeah. Well, that's how I'm reading it. So I concur with your understanding.
Okay, thank you, sir. Thank you, ma'am. Thank you, Cindy.
You're welcome, Lyle. All right. I'm going to mute myself and blow my nose real fast, and then we'll look at Amendment P. Better. So Amendment P also has to do with the administration of mission, and this is the one that Eddie was lifting up earlier. So it currently reads, all councils shall adopt and implement a sexual misconduct policy and a child and youth protection policy. The proposed change would read, all councils shall adopt and implement the following policies: a sexual misconduct policy, a harassment policy, a child and youth protection policy, and an anti-racism policy. And so I will share my pet peeve with you and with anyone who watches this later. It should use the language of prevention, sexual misconduct prevention policy, and a harassment prevention policy. But we do not have the opportunity to amend these overtures. We vote them up or down, these amendments. We vote them up or down as they are. But I urge you, please don't adopt policies for sexual misconduct. Adopt policies to prevent it. Thank you. So this expands what it's asking, again, all councils, so session, presbytery, synod, and general assembly, to include a harassment, prevention of harassment policy, and an anti-racism policy. Again, in the case of our presbytery, we have an anti-harassment policy as part of our Appendix Q in our employment guide, as well as the misconduct prevention and child and youth protection policies, and an anti-racism policy. So we have all of these. If this passes, then a session would also need to develop their own policies. And the behavior pieces could be in one policy. A safe church policy could include prevention of sexual misconduct, really any misconduct, prevention of harassment, and child and youth protection. The anti-racism policy may be the leading edge for a lot of our churches. Again, if this does pass a majority of the presbyteries, We will both look to the General Assembly for template and guidance, as well as seek to provide those things from the presbytery as well. So we would come alongside to help sessions come up with the language and policy that might make sense. Any questions on that one? And again, the question Eddie asked earlier, where before the misconduct prevention pieces were specifically for people in the ordination process, people in the commission ruling elder process, certified Christian educators. This is a blanket piece to require these policies that would then apply to the entire congregation, to the entire presbytery, the entire synod, the entire denomination. So that's one of the differences. Eddie, did you want to say something?
It's more of an administrative piece, not consequential, but since you asked, would that have any implications with insurance companies looking at churches to tighten up their?
Yeah, and often insurance companies want to know that, especially a safe church policy, prevention of misconduct policy is in place. And I mean, the other piece is a lot of our insurance providers, the major national providers, provide education modules. So the presbytery just recently, our commission on ministers and congregations, has just recently approved using some of the modules from our insurance provider for the ongoing misconduct prevention training. So that you can't use them for your first healthy boundaries training, but for your renewal of certification, we've approved some of the online courses through our insurance provider. So not only do they look for it, they want to help us actually implement those policies. Yeah. Q, Amendment Q, about the presbytery and relations with sessions. And this is to add language to give the presbyteries some additional authority. The language to add, establish minimum compensation standards, is already the presbytery's work. The proposed new language, including provisions for dissolution terms for pastoral calls and for those serving in temporary pastoral service. So this is one of those closing of the loops that as presbyteries are often in the role of negotiating dissolution of pastoral calls, and sometimes that means having severance packages. That this clearly gives the presbytery the right to do that work. We've been doing it. This closes that loop. Any questions on that one? And every time there's a loop that needs to be closed, it's because somebody was able to say, it doesn't say you can do that.
Yeah.
And then we're like, well, I guess we need to make it say that we can do that. Amendment R has to do with the synod and its composition and responsibilities. And this again is language to be added. So in their language about commissioners, the proposed additional language reads this way: a synod may enroll or provide by rule for the enrollment of ministers of word and sacrament, and ruling elders in numbers as nearly equal as possible during terms of elected service to the synod. Such enrollment may be used, among other purposes, for fulfilling the principles of participation and representation, and may include representation from the synod's racial, ethnic, active leadership. And so yeah, I don't really have anything to say about that. I don't remember the rationale. Okay. Now I remember. So presbyteries elect commissioners to the synod, and the synod has no say over who a presbytery elects as commissioners. At the same time, the synods are required to have representation in their body. And so if presbyteries are only electing women as commissioners, the synod needs to have a way to balance representation. And so this would allow a synod to enroll additional people beyond commissioners who would be part of the discerning body. I'm using women. It's most likely more often a matter of race, and you see racial, ethnic leadership lifted up here. It could also be a matter of ordination, minister of word and sacrament versus ruling elder. But it allows for the synod to say, we're only hearing one voice, or we're only hearing one kind of voice. How can we broaden our body in order to discern more fully what God is wanting to do among us? So that's the purpose behind this amendment. Any questions about that one? All right. Yes. So now we're in chapter 4. Confidence and privilege, and trust and confidentiality. Whoo! Dang. Okay. This is both adding and striking out. So under G40301, trust and confidentiality, this is the proposed language. In the exercise of pastoral care, ministers of the word and sacrament and ruling elders who have been commissioned by a presbytery to limit pastoral service, so those are the roles, work to create communities of trust, accountability, and confidentiality while protecting the vulnerable. Confidentiality creates safe and sacred space for individuals to share concerns, questions, and/or burdens, and seek spiritual guidance. Confidentiality should not be an excuse to hold secret the knowledge or risk of harm, especially when related to the physical abuse, neglect, sexual abuse of a minor or an adult who lacks mental capacity. Ministers of the word and sacrament and commission ruling elders shall hold in confidence all information revealed to them in the course of providing care and all information relating to the exercise of such care, except when the person whose confidences are at issue gives express consent to reveal confidential information, then a minister of the word and sacrament or a commissioned ruling elder may, but cannot be compelled to, reveal confidential information. Or when a minister of the word and sacrament or a commissioned ruling elder believes that there is risk of imminent bodily harm to any person. So the second paragraph is just changing the language to match the language we're using now of commission ruling elder. So that piece is more of the grammatical change and less of a substance change. The substantive change is around the language of what confidentiality is and what it should not be. And again, that Uh, yeah, that was related again to the work around sexual misconduct in the PCUSA. So, any questions about that one? I'm really seeking to help us understand what confidentiality is meant to be. Okay.
Excellent.
Woo! That's all of the proposed amendments to the form of government. Woo! Managed to do that in an hour. I'm impressed. Any questions? Anything that came up that we didn't touch on as I went through all of those?
On the whole, I think they're good. 8, should we say 2?
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, you know, people do a lot of careful work. And remember, in order for them to get to this point, they had to first either come out of a task force or a committee or a commission that was established by the General Assembly, or come from a presbytery or synod. So there was first a group of people that worked on the overture, and then the overture went to a committee that met in Louisville this summer, and then hashed and wordsmithed and heard arguments for and against, and then had to come out of the committee to the plenary of the General Assembly, where again things were hashed and wordsmithed even more. And then the General Assembly had to say yes. So that's not meant to say that they all should be approved. That's for our presbyteries to decide. It's not meaning to say that they're all perfect and don't need any further wordsmithing. Like I said, I think they should say prevention of sexual misconduct policy. But all of these proposed amendments have been touched by people across the denomination and discussed and wrestled with. And that's a good thing to know. That's a good part of our process. So, yeah. Okay.
Cindy,
Yeah.
sorry, I wondered why, and I'm new to this process, so that may be old news to everyone else, that so many of these relate to the topic of sexual abuse and child sexual abuse. And I'm wondering how that focus came into being at this point, as opposed to 10 or 20 years. What has drawn all of this attention to that particular area?
Yeah. So in 2016, and I'll back up now that I've started to say that. So we've been requiring as a denomination attention to misconduct prevention and providing safe spaces for minors and vulnerable adults for a while. But in 2016, at that General Assembly, a group of people who had experienced sexual misconduct in the church came to that assembly and asked for a task force to be formed. And they said, the church has done so much, but harm is still being perpetrated. We want to very intentionally look closely and see what else the church can do, should do, needs to do. These recommendations were all supposed to come in 2020 to the out of order assembly, which is one of the reasons why there are so many overtures. Usually we don't have this many to take a look at, but we could not bring any overtures to the Book of Order in 2020 Because I mean, we just, that opened up a polity can of worms. And so the decision was no changes to our form of government. We can't do that when technically aren't supposed to be meeting at all. And so that's why they're all coming out of this particular General Assembly, but it comes out of people who experienced harm in the church saying, we need to do more. And so that's the underlying impetus.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, yeah, definitely.
We don't move quickly as a denomination, do we?
No, and to be fair, so one of the leaders on that task force was harmed in another denomination, so grew up in a different denomination and experienced harm. So not everybody in the task force experienced harm in the PCUSA, but I think we all are called to reckon with the level of harm done in what is supposed to be a spiritually safe space, as well as physically and emotionally safe, that harm in a church has a deeper dimension of violence. Yeah.
Thank you.
No, and thank you for asking. All right, everybody. So if it's not on your calendars, make sure that Tuesday, February 7th, starting at 6:30 p.m. is on your calendars. That is when we are having our special Presbyterian meeting to consider all of the amendments. And that will be on Zoom, so we don't have to worry about winter weather travel. We just have to worry about winter weather blackouts. And pray God. Please don't do that. Please, please. Our next third Thursday training is on Thursday, January 19th. And like I said, that's when we're going to dive into the proposed overtures, proposed amendments to the rules of discipline, including the complete replacement. And so we're going to spend a bit of time doing that side-by-side comparison. What changes? What's the same? How does it shift? Yeah. So that's Thursday, January 19th, 5 p.m. And again, we'll plan for an hour and a half. Tonight, we moved nice and quick, so we're done before the hour and a half allotted time. So, any last questions before we close our evening?
Just hoping that February goes as well.
Well, and hopefully, people are taking advantage of these things. So we all know what we'll be voting on, so that when it comes time to debate, we will be debating out of some space of being prepared for that. That's part of my hope. Yeah. So be sure, like as always, once we sign off, I will let Zoom convert the recording, and then it will be uploaded to the Presbytery's YouTube page. So you can share it, you can review it. But as congregations begin to set commissioners for that meeting, these can be helpful resources. All right.